Yikes! It feels like it's been forever. Hi there, students. I'm XS. That's little x, little s, which stands for extra sweet, because that's what I am. I'm a puppy-sensei, and I make Japanese content to help you level up your abilities. I'm so sorry that it's been a little while since I've gotten a grammar drop out. Between getting sick and everything else that I've had going on for the last couple of weeks, I just kind of felt like it was significantly healthier for me to take a bit of time off rather than, trying to push myself. Anyway, today we're going to learn a handy little fragment in Japanese that can mean something like to an extent or to some degree. That fragment is hodo. Yeah, you should see it here. So hodo, we can see the kanji, we can see the hiragana, and it means something like to an extent, to a degree, to some amount, or to some limit. We're going to talk about how this fragment ends up being used today, but right from jump, I think we really have to talk about where you might have heard this hodo before. Naruhodo ne. So this is naruhodo. You might have heard naruhodo before, maybe even on this channel, or perhaps you know it from anime. It means something like, aha, I see, I've got it, understood, something like that. Now, the first thing that I want you to know is that we don't usually write naruhodo in kanji like this. And that's a little bit weird because both of these are common kanji. You'll see them independently. You're going to see naru and you're going to see that kanji. You're going to see hodo and you're going to see that kanji. But when put together, naruhodo usually will not use kanji. It's rare, but I have seen naruhodo written in kanji from time to time. The second thing that I want you to notice is that this hodo that we're seeing in naruhodo is part of a set phrase. And so, for that reason, it would be kind of a mistake for us to try to translate this literally. But hey, I'm all about making mistakes around here, so let's do it anyway. The naru from naruhodo could be a verb meaning to become or to end up being, something like that, right? So it means changing from one state into another state. And the hodo, as we're going to discuss today, means to the extent that. Okay? So, from a very literal definition, we might say that naruhodo could translate to aha. So it's gonna be like that, is it? Yeah. But again, that's not exactly the way that we actually think about naruhodo since it's a set phrase, right? So, moving on. As a fragment, this hodo is, if I'm being honest, not exactly super easy to accurately define if it's being used all by itself. So I think it's going to be best if I just show you some examples. Here's our first example. このスープは辛いほど食べたくないです. Now, most of this sentence should be somewhat familiar to you, I believe. We've already learned karai, and that means spicy. And we have our basic verb taberu. We've learned that and we've talked about it extensively. But here it's in the negative adjectival form. Tabetakunai. I do not want to eat. That's tabetai, I want to eat, in the negative, takunai. Tabetakunai, I do not want to eat. Okay, so we're getting a definition for this. The soup is so spicy, このスープは辛いほど that I don't want to eat it. Tabetakunai. Okay, let's briefly discuss what hodo is actually doing in this sentence. I've given you a translation for karai hodo in this sentence that I'm kind of treating as it is so spicy that. But basically, a very literal definition would be it is spicy to the extent that something happens, right? It's spicy to the point that I don't want to eat it. And it's that to the point that actually hodo is doing in this sentence. So, このスープは辛いほど食べたくない. It is so spicy, spicy to the point that I do not want to eat it. All right, well, let's actually think about how we use this hodo form then. Here's a grammar point. Basically, we can use hodo as a suffix on any e adjective, just like we saw in karai above. But we can also use it with na adjectives, nouns, and the plain form of a verb in the non-past. I'd like to quickly look at an example from each one of these. So here is a plain form verb. Ne? 早く寝るほどあまりよく寝ない. Understanding the meaning of this sentence might actually work better if we look at it from the end of the sentence. あまりよく寝ない. That means to not sleep well. So 寝ない is the negative form of 寝る, to sleep. あまりよく, not very good, not very well. あまりよく寝ない, my sleep is not good. 早く寝る would mean to go to sleep early. I'd like you to remember that 早い can mean either fast or early. In Japanese, these are kind of the same concepts. If you showed up early, you must have been fast. And these two ideas, あまりよく寝ない and 早く寝る, are being linked by hodo. So based on what we've given so far as a definition for hodo, these two fragments, あまりよく寝ない and 早く寝る, are kind of being linked together to mean something like, to the extent that I go to sleep early, I don't sleep well. Now, in English, that sentence doesn't make too much sense, so let's use context, and we can say, going to sleep early means not sleeping well. One thing equates to the other. To the extent that I go to sleep early, I end up not sleeping well. Now, again, we can even further extrapolate that from context, and we can say that when one sleeps earlier, one's sleep is bad. In other words, the earlier I go to sleep, the worse my sleep is. That feels like a huge leap in English, right? Because in Japanese, we don't have a concept in this sentence of going to sleep earlier automatically equates to worse sleep. But that's kind of the work that hodo is doing here. To the extent that I go to sleep at some early point, my sleep is going to be worse, and that can continue to follow back through time. The earlier I go to sleep, the worse it ends up being. So in a way, this hodo is kind of equatative. It's saying this thing happens, and to the extent that that thing happens, this sometimes relatively negative thing can follow. I think it's important that we remember the idea that sometimes it can be negative. We're going to come back to that. All right, what about when we use this with nouns? With a noun, that feels pretty weird, right? To the extent that a noun isn't really something that we would say in English. To the extent that dog, that doesn't make sense. But in Japanese, we can make this work. However, because it feels difficult to understand in this construction, I think that we have to talk about it and think about it a little bit. So here's another example, this time using a noun with that hodo construction. その国ほど映画が人気なの国がありません. Okay. All right, so we're actually going to see a bit of a pattern emerging where we're going to use hodo with a noun and it's going to result in a negative sentence. That's going to happen a lot. That's because these sentences are often going to end up being translated like, there is no possible noun that is as much as like something as some other given noun, right? I know that's a little difficult to understand, but let me give you another example and we'll talk about it further, okay? So, Puppy-sensei hodo kawai koinu sensei ga imasen. I'd like to look at both of these sentences together for a moment, all right? So, その国ほど映画が人気なの国がありません. And Puppy-sensei hodo kawai koinu sensei ga imasen. Ne? Both of these are kind of saying like, there is no thing that fulfills the same quality as this thing. In this country, movies are extremely popular, and there's no other country where movies are as popular. Popular to the extent. That's what we're getting from hodo. And likewise, in this very, very, very sweet sentence, Puppy-sensei, hodo kawai koinu sensei ga imasen. There is no cute puppy-sensei like Puppy-sensei. That's me. Do you see why these noun plus hodo sentences are often going to be negative? It's like there is no thing with the quality that is to the extent of this thing. As long as you're comparing similar nouns, you're always going to be able to make sentences in this same format. What do you think? Is that hodo form pretty difficult to understand? 勉強するほどよくわかります. If you study it, you're gonna understand. See you next week. またね